Among the roses lies a secret no bloom can cover. Welcome to Clue Hunt. I am your host, Elena Gray. Share where you're tuning in from. I love reading your notes. Now, into the garden mystery. It was the kind of autumn morning that made the roses sigh. A soft mist hung over the hedgerows. The ground glistened faintly with dew, and in the heart of St. Mary Mead, the Marbury estate gardens stood utterly still. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. That morning, Miss Marple received a note, folded with care and written in fine, shaking script. It said only, "There is something wrong with the roses. Please come. H.D. She." I knew immediately who had written it. Harold Dean, the estate's longtime gardener. A proud man with knotted hands, quiet eyes, and a love for roses deeper than most men reserved for family. Miss Marple put on her shawl, took her walking cane, and headed out. The Marbury Gardens were famous in the county, sprawling beds of hybrid tea roses, climbing vines draped over trellises, and a greenhouse said to shelter specimens rare even in Kew. But today, it all felt off. Too quiet, too still. She found Harold near the west border, sitting on a low stone bench, his cap in his hands and his face pale. He looked up as she approached, then gestured without a word toward the last rose bush in the row. It was strange indeed. Where? All other bushes had begun their withering descent into winter. This one had bloomed again, impossibly red, impossibly full. But what caught Miss Marple's eye was not the rose itself, it was the soil freshly disturbed. Uneven. "Did you dig here recently?" she asked. Harold's voice cracked. "No, ma'am, not for weeks. That bloom, it shouldn't be there. Not in November." Miss Marple knelt carefully, brushed the petals gently, and then leaned closer. She saw it just beneath the roots, something pale and small. Not a rock, a knuckle, the bone-white curve of a human finger. Miss Marple stood up slowly, brushing soil from her gloves. She didn't need to say anything. Harold Dean already knew what she had seen. His eyes were wet. "It's her," he whispered. "I think it's Lily. She went missing last spring. They said she ran off, but I knew she loved this place too much to ever leave it." Miss Marple looked again at the rose, one perfect bloom, one secret buried beneath it. And so began the mystery of the gardener's last rose. The police arrived by midday. Inspector Cray, who had long since stopped underestimating Miss Marple, listened closely as she spoke. The body, though only partially uncovered, was enough to confirm. It was Lily Abbott, 22, golden-haired, and once the pride of the Marbury kitchen staff. She had vanished 6 months ago. Her disappearance had stirred gossip for weeks, but no answers had come. Gone to London, some said. Eloped, others whispered. Miss Marple had believed neither. She loved those gardens, Harold Dean told the inspector, especially the west rose bed. She'd come out on her break just to sit near the climbing blush. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Did she ever speak of anyone? Not by name, Harold said, but she had a secret. I saw it in her. Smile. The police began their work. The rosebush was carefully removed, forensics arrived. But even in the bustle of science, Miss Marple kept to instinct, to memory. She remembered Lily, the way she once brought her tea at the village fete, the way she laughed, not loudly but with sudden warmth like sun on stone. She had ambition, that girl, not the kind that reached for wealth, but for belonging. And belonging, Miss Marple knew, was dangerous because sometimes the people you wanted to belong to didn't want you back. She visited the manor the next morning. Lady Marbury received, her pale and flustered, her hair pinned too tightly, her perfume too sharp. A dreadful business, she said. Poor girl, of course we searched, but if she truly wished to leave, she didn't, Miss Marple said simply. Lady Marbury's hand trembled as she poured tea. Well, I suppose. Perhaps she met someone. Young girls do. Miss Marple looked at the silver teapot. New, ornate. A gift, perhaps. Was anyone dismissed after Lily vanished? She asked. Just a footman, Lady Marbury said, too quickly. Private matter. Nothing to do with this. Miss Marple smiled. Politely. Of course not. But she took note. A missing girl, a dismissed servant. A rose that bloomed where none should. Some roots ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. And some lies, like soil, only settled when no one was looking. The morning after her visit to Lady Marbury, Miss Marple walked slowly to the vicarage, where the Reverend Arnold Finch kept old employment records for estate staff. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to the name of the dismissed footman, but it tugged at her the way a crooked stitch tugs at a finished row. George Bennet, the vicar said, leafing through a thin folder. Dismissed in May. No reference. Requested no reason given. Just gone. Did he live on the estate? Miss Marple asked briefly. They say he didn't mix much with the other staff. Kept to himself. But Lily was kind to everyone. She thanked the vicar, took note of George's last known address, a small rented room near the train station, and set off. The cottage had since been let to a new tenant, but the landlady remembered him. Tall lad, she said. Bit odd, talked to plants more than people. Left in a hurry. Paid 2 weeks in advance and vanished. Did he ever mention Lily Abbott? Miss Marple asked. The woman hesitated, then said, She came here once, I remember, because she brought him a tin of biscuits. I thought maybe they were sweet on each other. But when she left, he followed her out. They argued. She looked scared. Miss Marple walked back through the village slowly, letting the details settle in her mind. A girl who loved the garden, a gardener who adored her, and a quiet footman who argued with her days before she disappeared. She returned to the Marbury estate and wandered the garden paths alone. Near the west rosebed, she paused and looked again at the now empty patch of soil. And that's when she saw it. Just beyond the bushes, half buried in earth and overgrown ivy, was a small rusted trowel. She knelt and uncovered it. The handle worn, the initials GB scratched faintly into the wood. Someone had returned to this garden, not recently, but after Lily vanished, to bury her. Not just her body, but something else, something even more, delicate, something like love. The greenhouse at Marbury Manor stood like a glass cathedral at the edge of the estate, forgotten by most, remembered only by those who once loved it. Its iron frame was flecked with rust, its panes fogged by time. Roses still climbed the outside walls, curling like fingers desperate to get in. Miss Marple pushed open the creaking door. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of dying blooms and damp soil. There were pots half-turned, tools scattered, in drawers and benches covered in faded cloth. She moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the place. It felt sacred, heavy, as though memories hung like vines from the beams. And then she saw it, tucked behind a row of empty terracotta pots, a small leather-bound book, cracked at the edges, tied shut with garden twine. She untied it slowly. Inside, the handwriting was neat, slanted, and unmistakably male. It began simply, Her name was Lily. She smelled of thyme and rosewater, and I loved her more than any man should love what he's forbidden to have. GB, Miss Marple, sat on a bench and read. The pages told a quiet story. Of glances, in the garden, whispered words in the cold shed, and the warmth of hands touching soil together. George Bennet had fallen in love with Lily, not because she was kind or pretty or pure, but because she listened, because she made him feel seen. But Lily, the diary said, had fallen for another. The young master, Edwin Marbury. He promised her letters, he kissed her hands. He called her beautiful in the greenhouse while I watched through glass. Miss Marple's breath caught. She was going to leave. Not for London, but for shame. She was with child. And when he turned his back, she turned to me. Not for love, but for help. I told her I'd take her away, that I had money saved. But she cried. She said she couldn't leave the garden, that this was her home. So I buried her in it. Miss Marple closed the book gently. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply sat there in the heart of the roses, letting the silence speak. Because this was not a murder of hate. This was the grief of a man who loved in shadows, and broke in them too. Edwin Marbury was found, as usual, in the East Library, reclining with a brandy glass and a volume of Tennyson he likely never read. He looked surprised when Miss Marple entered, though he masked it well behind a smile just 1 second too late. "My dear Miss Marple," he said, standing to greet her. "Come for a literary discussion?" "Not quite," she replied, settling gently into a high-backed chair. "I've come about the greenhouse, and the girl you used to meet there." His hand paused mid-pour. The smile cracked. Not fully, but enough. "I've no idea what you mean." Miss Marple folded her hands in her lap. "Lily Abbott. You called. Her beautiful. Promised her letters, promised her more." He said nothing. The silence between them felt like frost on glass. "I've read the diary," she said softly. "George Bennett wrote it. He watched it all. And when she had nowhere to go, he gave her the only place he could." Edwin turned away, staring out the tall window. His voice, when it came, was low, measured. "I was young, foolish. I never thought she'd believe that I meant it. It was a game." "She believed it," Miss Marple said. "Enough to break. Enough to turn to a man she didn't love, because she couldn't live with what you left her carrying." Edwin flinched, a small guilty twitch. And when she vanished, she continued, "You said nothing. You let them gossip. Let them say she ran away. Even dismissed the only witness." His voice sharpened. "What did you want me to do? Confess? Ruin the family name? My mother would have died from the shame." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "She did die, Edwin. Not from shame, but from silence. And you let her." He looked at her. No longer a gentleman, no longer a host, but a man with red in his past and dust in his soul. "What happens now?" he asked. "I've given the diary to the police," she said. "George wrote the truth. And the truth has a way of blooming, even in winter." Edwin sank into the chair, suddenly small in that grand room. Miss Marple stood and turned to leave. Then she paused at the door. "She named the rose after herself," she said. "The one by the west wall. Lily's flame. It blooms when nothing else does." And then she was gone. The village photography shop was easy to miss. A narrow doorway tucked between the bakery and the chemist, with fading lace curtains and a bell that rang like an old cough. Miss Marple hadn't visited in years, but she remembered Mrs. Winifred Blight, the owner, as someone who never threw a photograph away, even if the faces in them had long left the village. She stepped inside, and the familiar scent of fixer and paper filled the air. "Jane Marple," said Winifred, peering over her spectacles. "You've come for a memory or a mystery?" "Perhaps both," Miss Marple said, smiling. "I was wondering if you kept the photographs from last spring's garden fete." Winifred nodded and shuffled toward a shelf labeled Marbury Estate 6th May. She pulled down a box, rummaged a little, and handed over a stiff black and white print. "There we are. Taken near the rose arch. I remember because the young Miss Lily was wearing a green ribbon in her hair." Miss Marple held the photo carefully. There it was, the garden, vibrant even in grayscale, with villagers laughing in their best coats. And near the edge of the frame, half-shadowed beneath the climbing blush rose, stood 3 figures: Lily Abbott, George Bennett, Edwin Marbury, not posed. not smiling, frozen. Lily looking at Edwin, Edwin looking away, and George looking directly at Lily, his eyes filled with something tender and terrible, as if he already knew he was about to lose her. Miss Marple stared at the image for a long time. It wasn't proof. It wasn't confession, but it was truth. Because sometimes a photograph doesn't capture a moment. It reveals it, and this one had captured the beginning of the end. George Bennet had not run far. Miss Marple found him where she expected, not in some far city, not on a train platform, but sitting in silence behind the old potting shed behind his mother's cottage. The same hands that once shaped rosebeds now trembled around a chipped teacup. Dirt lined his fingernails. He had not stopped tending things, only now, perhaps, he was waiting to be buried with them. He looked up when she arrived. "I thought it would be you," he said softly. She sat beside him without a word, letting the quiet settle between them like falling petals. After a while, he spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I never touched her like that, not once." Miss Marple nodded. "I know," George's voice cracked. "She came to me crying, said he wouldn't even look at her, said she couldn't stay, she wanted to disappear." "You offered her an escape," Miss Marple said. "I offered her a way to hide, just until she could decide. But she didn't eat. She didn't sleep. Every morning, she sat by that rose and stared into nothing. I thought, maybe if I planted something for her, he broke. She died in the night, Miss Marple, just stopped. Her heart, her grief. I woke and she was cold." He buried his face in his hands. "I was scared, so I dug, and I planted the rose over her. I thought maybe if it bloomed no one would ask." Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on his arm. "You buried her gently, you didn't kill her, but you hid her, and that silence cost more than truth ever could." He nodded slowly. "I'll speak to the police." "You already have," she said. "I gave them your diary, they believe you. They've decided not to press charges." George looked at her with wide, tired eyes. "Why?" "Because the world punishes murder," she said, "but it sometimes forgives sorrow." He broke into tears, not of guilt this time, but release. Miss Marple stood to leave. She looked once more toward the shed, the soil, the roses blooming around the boundary. Then she turned to him. "Plant something new, George," she said. "Not to hide her, but to remember her." It was a gentle Sunday in St. Mary Mead when the knitting circle gathered once more at Heatherbank Cottage. The air smelled of cardamom tea and rosehip jam. Outside, early spring sun touched the hedges. Inside, needles clinked quietly, weaving memory into wool. Lucy Farrow had brought a pattern, soft, delicate, and shaped like a blooming rose. "For her," she said simply. No one had to ask who. Her was Clara Bletchley brought a skein of palest pink. Nora Green brought silk thread to edge the borders. Together the women worked in silence, not the silence of secrets anymore, but the kind that holds space for love and loss. As stitches grew, so did peace. Miss Marple didn't knit. She simply watched. Each movement a tribute, each thread a confession turned into comfort. By mid-afternoon the shawl had taken form, circular, gentle, warm. "A perfect bloom. We'll give it to the church," Lucy said. "For new mothers." Miss Marple nodded. "That would please her, I think." Later that evening, alone by the window, Miss Marple opened her diary one last time. She turned to a clean page and wrote slowly in neat, firm lines. "Some roses bloom late, some bloom briefly, but all leave a fragrance the earth never forgets." She closed the book, and as the sun slipped behind the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, she folded the quiet into her shawl and began once again to knit.